What is up, everyone? It's Punkshu here with BattleAxTheater. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the subject of the downtime debate, and more specifically, why downtime in a modern MMO might be a bad idea. Now let's talk about how downtime is potentially a bad thing in a modern MMO. Previously, we discussed how meaningful downtime is beneficial for the community, and it's most often reflected in the old school MMO style, and such as Final Fantasy XI or EverQuest, maybe even to an extent EverQuest Online Adventures, Dark Age of Camelot, etc. You know, those older style MMOs. Now the reason why that was beneficial was because having that downtime allowed you to communicate, allowed you to build those relationships with people that you didn't have previously. Now, the downside of all this is that many MMO players have changed their way of thinking. Multiplayer online RPG games have really changed in terms of content and gameplay and functionality, if you will. So over the years, many of us have evolved to meet those newer standards and have met those expectations of those game publishers. And the reverse is true as well. Those game publishers have come to meet the needs of the community. So if we take a look at the perspective of like the average MMO player back in the EverQuest Final Fantasy era, we're looking at a completely different demographic than we used to have in the early days of the MMO. Back when MMOs were first introduced to the PC gamer, many of the gamers that picked up the MMORPG were players that were looking for this life-altering experience, if you will. They're looking for this very in-depth growth of a game. So, in terms of modern standards, the MMO has been exposed to pretty much everyone. Like, people that you thought would have never considered themselves a gamer, they're gamers now. And then the ones that want to take it a bit further might play an MMO or might, play League of Legends or something like that to a deeper extent than what they would have in the past. So where I'm going with this is that MMOs have evolved, MMOs have changed, and the player base has come to expect that change. So there's lots of things that have been introduced into the MMO space that we did not have back when we used to play EverQuest and Final Fantasy XI, Dark Age of Camelot, etc. back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So where am I going with this? Well, the fact that the MMO genre has changed so much over the last 20 years since older MMORPGs were released has opened them up to a much more diverse community. So what does this mean for Pantheon? Well, I know that we're in pre-alpha, but it seems to be that we are leaning toward the meaningful downtime. And that's what kind of sparks this whole debate. And I think this takes the perspective of those individuals that are coming from the modern MMO space, and even those who have grown into the modern MMO space. Like, do we really need downtime? And I think what's going to happen is that if there's not a happy medium that's met somewhere in the middle, because I personally do feel that we need to have that meaningful downtime in some capacity. However, I think it's going to limit the space to those individuals that are looking for that specifically, and it's going to deter individuals that are not necessarily looking for that old school style of MMORPG play style. It's going to deter them from actually wanting to play the game. And what does this mean? Well, it means that we're going to have less people to play with, for one, and that kind of sucks as a somebody who wants to play with other people. Sure, there'll still be community. I mean, you look at EverQuest and Final Fantasy XI these days, there's still plenty of community members out there, but the vast majority of players who played that game for an extensive period of time have left for other MMOs. They found other avenues. So what I think this is going to do is it's going to limit accessibility to those individuals that don't have extensive amounts of time to spend playing a video game, where they want to be able to get in, accomplish something in an hour or two, and then get out and actually have that sense of accomplishment, which a lot of modern MMOs do bring, but we'll talk more about that here in a moment. Let's talk a little bit more about limited accessibility. So what I mean by limited accessibility is I mean that the game style is so much different than what people are used to, they're going to be inclined to not play the game purely based on some of these facts. So the modern MMO player is used to this gameplay style that has minimal resource management, whereas it's not that it doesn't exist, but compared to the older style of MMO gameplay, it's not as extensive and it's not as important. So you don't lose your DPS, you lose some, but not as much. Same with tanking and healing. Your throughput will vary, but it's not going to be so detrimental that it's going to cause a major issue in most cases. So the modern MMO player is looking for, combat that allows you to get in, be active, and, knock it out and just kind of enjoy like a casual gameplay. And then there's, while there is more extensive gameplay toward the end game in a lot of these games, they don't really require this amount of downtime per se that we have now. So I mean, we'll use World of Warcraft for an example, since it's such a major game, right? So World of Warcraft, when you're in a raid scenario, you might burn through a ton of mana or MP during a fight, but ultimately you're going to sit down, you're going to drink a drink, and you're going to be ready to move on to the next trash pull right after whatever boss that you just completed or what have you. So in the example of Final Fantasy XI and EverQuest, you have this scenario where you're simply just pulling a singular mob to a group of individuals, and doing this repeatedly, you have to manage your resources in a way that allow you to continue to pull the enemies and continue to rake in that experience. So if you have downtime, and which, in the case of Pantheon, we're looking at downtime in a sense of, let's sit down, let's regen our resources, and let's have that community talk. But we also live in a modern society. A lot of people run dual monitors these days because it's a lot more accessible. People have their mobile devices. So I don't really necessarily see this as being a beneficial thing, because someone's more likely to pick up their phone or open a second screen, so that way they can find something to do to engage socially through social media and things like that, rather than engage in the game. So there's a couple propositions that I have that I think are going to be beneficial for a game in its current state, because again, it is in pre-alpha. And being that it's in pre-alpha gives us the opportunity to provide feedback to VR, and they can make these changes as necessary. And a couple pieces that I have I think would bring better flow to the combat system, as well as tackle the whole issue of downtime by providing meaningful downtime, but in smaller increments. Things that require you to still be engaged in the game. They don't give you enough time to come over here and pick up your phone and start playing on Facebook or start playing on Twitter or Snapchat. It's something that keeps you involved in the game, but still gives you a little bit of downtime where you can maybe squeeze in a couple sentences every couple of pulls. So let's dive into some things that a particular Reddit user had mentioned, some things that they had thought of that were along the same lines of what I was thinking. So Reddit user Sebastian Sly proposed this idea. Now, there was an individual thread that specifically tackles this topic that they posted, and I'll go ahead and post a link in the description below, because I think it's a very interesting conversation, and it's kind of in line with one of the thoughts that I had. So the idea is to provide additional resources to other classes, because the thought process is essentially that there's meaningful downtime in the sense of community building, but the reality of it is if you're not a Magic user, you're just sitting there waiting for the Magic users to replenish their resources. So the proposed idea is adding additional resources, and in a sense of this particular post is more downtime. But the way I see it is this. Providing additional resources to these other classes provides two things. It provides an additional resource that has to be managed, which could potentially add to an actual meaning to the meaningful downtime. So they're having to rest to get those resources back, as well as the Magic users. The other thing I think it's going to do, and this is going to segue into another solution, is it adds a resource for you to use on other abilities. So again, we're going to hammer this fact home over many videos, the fact that Pantheon is still in pre-alpha. However, the footage that we have seen has been very simplistic, and it really embraces the old school MMO style of play. It's got your auto attack system, and I know the animations will likely change for that, and that will make it seem a little bit more active. But the amount of abilities that you have to use don't really seem to be as extensive as a modern MMO. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I've always said games like World of Warcraft you may only use 4 or 5 abilities regularly in combat, but to have like an entire bar full of cooldowns that you have to micromanage and things like that, it gets to be a bit too much. It doesn't allow you to truly focus on the environment, and you're having to turn your focus away from the environment. So where am I going with this? Well, the place that I'm going with this is, why not make combat a bit more active? Why not take those resources that are being added for additional downtime and make them to where they're utilized to use other abilities that increase your defense as a tank, or increase your health as a tank, or some sort of, maximum hit point balance or something like that. But give a small damage increase ability that fills in the gaps and uses a small amount of a secondary resource for DPS. Give something to healers that allow them to contribute to the fight mechanics, but also give back mana instead of giving back health, which was proposed, or which was mentioned rather, in another post. So give all of these classes this micro resource, give them these micro abilities so that everything has to be used, and then ultimately there's going to be a little bit of downtime in between things. And one of the things that, that back in the day when playing Final Fantasy, if your puller was out of their primary resource, somebody else in the party would take a moment to go pull a couple of mobs for that puller so that they could get their resource back. And I think that's a really cool dynamic, and I think this would offer that a similar type of gameplay. So you kind of appealed to the modern day gamer in the sense of you're giving them a more active combat system. You're appealing to the old school MMO gamer who wants that meaningful downtime by providing it in smaller increments. And in addition to that, you're kind of tackling everything as a whole so that these two types of players, they can mesh together. Now, one of the other things that I thought would be a very simple fix of this is reduce the amount of time that it takes to regen. Now, we know that the system in terms of regeneration is really not that long. It seems a lot longer, but I'd like to see it where there's no combat medding at all. I don't think combat medding is necessary. I think if you're going to med, it should be something you do in an out of combat context. And it should be, because I mean, if you're in combat, you're not going to have a conversation with your group while you are resting and nobody else is. So I think this should be purely an out of combat system, and that should be put in smaller increments, so that way you have maybe 10 to 30 seconds to type out a sentence or have a brief conversation in between pulls, but it's not extensive enough of a gap that one can just reach over and pick up their phone or open up Facebook on their computer or open up Twitter, etc. They're actually engaging. That gives you a moment of respite to actually have a conversation within the game, but not enough time to become fully engaged with something outside of the game, something external. So I think all of these together are really going to do a good job of bringing that whole system together. And again, remember, we are in pre-alpha right now. So regardless of that, though, it is our job as a community to provide feedback and not just bicker back and forth, but to actually have this conversation. So, any toxicity around this subject, I mean, I can understand people being irritated. I can understand people wondering, in terms of accessibility, what it's going to offer, or not happy with the evolution of the classic MMO. But the reality of it is this is the conversation that has to be had. It is becoming to the point where, we are beating a dead horse, and I don't see us making any more videos on this particular topic. However, it is something that it is our duty as a community to provide feedback to VR, so that way they can make these implementations, or they can at least heed our advice or understand what we want. So I think that's something that we should continue to bring forward. So shout out again to Sebastian Sly over on Reddit. Again, I thought it was a great idea. There's a bunch of other people out there that had amazing ideas. and I can't name everyone individually, but you know, there was a lot of feedback in the community in terms of Reddit, on YouTube, etc. And it goes both ways. It's in both camps. So as far as this debate is concerned, I mean, first video and this video, I think it gives both sides of the perspective. Me, myself, I'm kind of in the middle, right? I'd like to see some of that meaningful downtime, but I'm also absolutely okay with some of these modern creature comforts brought into a game, so that way there's accessibility there for players who don't have a lot of time to play, that so that way there's fluid combat, because that's one of the things that I really liked and enjoyed about certain classes. But in the sense of the classic MMO, there are very few classes that I found were busy enough to really compel me to want to play them all the time. So I'd like to see some busyness in the classes. I'd like to see it where there's a balance, where there's no combat medding. I'd like to see some animations that make medding look more immersive, if you will. It's not just a pull sit motion. It's where you're actually doing something that is pertinent to your class. And I would like to see these abilities that fill the combat and allow you to, you know, manage that micro resource. So again, tell us what you think. What do you think about this? I mean, I want to keep this debate going in the sense, I don't want to beat a dead horse and make any more videos about it, but I think the conversation is still extremely relevant. So let us know in the comments what you think. I'll go ahead and provide a link to the Pantheon Reddit, as well as that specific post in the Pantheon Reddit regarding the additional resources and the more downtime. But yeah, let us know what you think in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to take a look at our next video or see our next videos. And, you know, most of all, we hope you're enjoying our content. And if you are, please let us know so we can continue doing what you want us to do. And if you have any constructive criticism, we're definitely open to it. And, you know, we are a small channel at this moment in time, so every comment is read. Any post on Reddit is gone through, and we read those comments as well. And on the Pantheon forums very soon as well. We did just recently pledge, so we put our pledge in. We have access to the forums, and that's a resource we plan on utilizing here very soon. So please comment, like if you like it, don't if you don't, subscribe so that way you can be notified when our next videos are up. And we hope you again once again enjoy our content, and you have yourselves a great one.